What do we use credit for? It's exactly what I just talked about. It's important. And the way the FICO scores and the credit scores work, there's three reporting agencies: Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion. All of them operate pretty much the same. And what they do is compile information on any company that they have professional relationships with that you are dealing with. And there's 5 factors that come into how a credit score is calculated. Number 1 is how you've treated your credit, whether you've handled it properly or not, the balances you have in all of your borrowings. And number 3 is, what is number 3? I forget number 3 for a second. Number 3 is, let's see, sorry about that.
How your FICO score is calculated?
No, I'm sorry. Let's see.
Payment history, debt amounts owed, age of credit history,
age of credit history. Yep. And the keys there are, the last 2 are new credit and types of credit. What everybody needs to focus on are the first 3, because the first 3 represent 80% of the 100% that results in your credit score. So your payment history, how you've paid things, is 35% of it. Your total balance is outstanding is 30%, and the length of your credit history is 15%. So that's 80% out of 100. The new credits, they can impact you as well. You don't want to have too many new credits at one time. And the last one, which is, what's the last one again, Steve?
The mix of your accounts and the types of credit.
Types of accounts, whether it's a credit card, an installment loan, a mortgage, things of that nature. So the top 3 are what people need to focus on.
Well, Don,
go ahead, Steve.
No, I didn't mean to interrupt you. What I wanted to say is the reason that you had some hesitation is the 3 credit agencies that you said, Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax, they all differ slightly. And there's another thing called the Vantage score, which combines them all and whatever. But what we're saying here that I really want to make clear to everyone listening, it's a question a guy asked me one time in prison. He said, he was really, really frustrated. He said, they say you can get a free credit score if you write a letter and request it, stuff like that. And he says, and I wrote to all 3 of those agencies, and only one of them gave me my score. And he said, so how do I make the other 2 give me my score? So you can understand the tone that he was coming from. And he didn't like my response at all. And I said, well, let me ask you a question. Was the score that you got high or low, or what was it? He goes, well, it was really low. And I said, well, the other 2 are going to be really low also. You don't need to see all 3 scores right now. Basically, they're all almost always about the same. But the whole point is, it's not just what your score is. It's how did your score get that way, and what can you do to make it better? That's what I'm really trying to say. So with that said, Don, did you have something else you wanted to add when we were talking about how your score is calculated?
Well, the information that is compiled that's shown in a credit report, basically your name, current address, previous address, your date of birth, social security number, and your place of employment, both current and previous employers. So that's what they use in your report. So if you receive a credit report, those are the 5 bits of information that will be contained in that report. So, but the key really is, in order to keep good credit, well, let's start out. How do you, first of all, get credit, obtain credit? We went into that a little bit. Open checking accounts, savings accounts, whatever you can do. And if you don't have any credit and don't have the financial income, the income to really support your initial request for credit, it's going to take time. You said earlier, there's no easy way of obtaining credit. There's no easy way of reaffirming your credit once it goes bad. But what you have to do is be patient. So once you establish credit, the key is to maintain it. And by that means pay it on time. If you have problems, communicate. Communication is probably the second most important aspect outside of character in the entire credit process. By that, I mean, if you're having problems, let your creditor, let your lender know what the status is. If you have to skip a payment on a credit card, call them well in advance as soon as you can determine that's the case. They'll work with you. If you miss 2 payments in a row, it's a little different story unless you explain to them exactly what the circumstances are. You have a hardship, hospitalization, medical problems, things of that nature. Most lenders will work with you as much as they can. So keep them aware of what is going on. Other aspects, once you obtain credit, just make sure you handle it as agreed. Checking accounts and savings accounts, they don't show up on credit reports, but banks check on them and lenders check on them as well. They call other banks. There's references that you can obtain on checking and savings accounts. So whatever you have, financially speaking, make sure that it's maintained properly. Don't have any overdrafts in your checking account. Handle the savings account properly. Make sure you make your payments on credit cards. That's really it. There's about 10 other factors that go into it. But once you have credit problems, that's really the difficult part. And we could have a whole other show on that because it takes at times years to reestablish your credit to the extent where you're able to borrow money the way you might need it. So that's in a nutshell what we have in regard to credit, obtaining credit, and trying to reestablish credit.
Don, in my simplistic way to try to keep into the basics of this, I always tell people that the key is just start right now doing things the right way, and eventually it'll work itself out. And there are some specific steps you can take to move it along quicker. If we wanted to help somebody establish credit, say they came to you and they wanted a loan, but they were nice as they could be and you wanted to help them, but you just couldn't because there's limitations within the banking industry that you're not allowed to do. But if somebody doesn't have good credit, one of the very best things they can do if they want to start to establish it is to get a cosigner. Can you speak to the importance of being able to get a cosigner, which is based on that person trusting you?
Right. That's a good point. The ability to obtain a cosigner has a lot to do with your character. Once again, not to reflect on that too often, but that is a primary consideration. If you don't have the credit to establish more credit or obtain credit, if you have friends who can vouch for you and are willing to cosign, and a cosigner is nothing more than somebody who believes in you, trusts in you, and believes you're going to pay the money back. They're just as liable as the borrower, and some people don't realize that, and it causes problems at times. A cosigner is the same as the direct borrower. So if you know somebody, based on your character, your knowledge in the community, the more you can do to improve your overall character and personality, the better your means are of borrowing money. Cosigners are extremely important. Some cosigners will pledge cash as collateral to make sure that you're going to obtain the loan. Some of them merely need to sign because of their financial wherewithal. They're strong enough to support the loan request. But that's a great way to do it. You have to be creative when you're trying to obtain credit. But one of the means of being creative is having good character and having people who trust you and believe in you that will co-sign for you and help you establish credit.
Yeah, and that can't be stressed enough. So if you're a person that's had a lot of bad things in your life going on and you want to start your life over and you want credit, you need credit for all the reasons that you spoke about. You need it for emergencies. You got to learn to use it correctly. We're not going to go all the way into how to maintain the proper payments on a credit card and so forth, but improper payments on credit cards cost you a fortune. And you can go back, a person can go back into my shows on that. I gave one example where there was a 35-cent balance on an account that my wife thought had been paid off. And it really was paid off, but the bookkeeping took place and they didn't post her payment properly and they eventually credited all this back. But that 35-cent actually was 28 cents. It was a $35 late charge because she wasn't looking to make a payment because she thought she had a zero balance on that account. And so 2 months went by and that balance went from 28 cents to $35 late charge plus a little interest on that, another $35. It ended up being about $74 that we were getting bills from a credit card company. And so when you don't make your payments on time, if it's a real situation and you just make them late, it's the late charges more than the interest. And when they start looking at your credit reports, they're going to track how many times you're making late charges and what your payment history is. So these are things that I think are somewhat common sense. Pay your bills on time. Have a job, pay your bills on time, try to live within your means. Don't use credit just for things that are not necessities or that you can't afford to pay back properly, because it'll catch up with you. You'll get bad credit and it takes forever to get it clean. Now, getting it clean, what's the process to try to get it clean if your credit report has wrong information on it?
This is one of the mysteries of life, Steve, because there's no easy way. If there are errors, if you have credit that's showing up on your credit report that you didn't obtain, it's somebody else's credit and it was mistakenly placed on your credit report. You have to go to your credit bureau, you have to write to them. In the old days, you went to an office in each city and did it in person, and you could do it in a week or 2 weeks. Today, it will take, on average, probably a year or 2 years to clean up. And what you have to do is prove beyond the shadow of a doubt that that was not your credit. You never had credit with whatever entity is shown on that credit report. People don't necessarily believe you when you try and do that, and it's extremely difficult to prove that you never had the credit. And at times it goes on for years. I've seen it last 5, 6, 7 years where they could never straighten out the credit. And it doesn't come off your credit report until it's substantiated that, in fact, it was not your credit. So that's one that you could talk about for a long time. You could get people in here, and I know a lot of them who have gone through this process, and it's a terrible process, because what happens is, depending upon the amount of credit that's mistakenly placed on your report, that can prevent you from obtaining additional credit. And I had a couple probably 10, 12 years ago that happened too. And the way this happened was Social Security numbers for both the husband and wife were one digit off from another couple with the exact same name. And they were trying to get a mortgage. My customers were trying to obtain a mortgage, and they couldn't get their mortgage for almost 2 years, although they had perfect credit themselves prior to this information being misplaced on their credit report. So they actually sued, and they received $25,000 from a company who had put the improper information on there, but it still delayed their mortgage closing by 2 years. They actually lost a house in that 2-year interim period. So it can be very, very devastating, as it was in that case. So the answer is there's no easy way of cleaning it up.
I've been involved in situations where the place where the purchase was made had some bad bookkeeping, and it showed that your account hadn't been paid properly, and they reported it to the credit bureau, and the credit bureau can't do anything at all about that until you go back to the company that's messed up their own records. And so it's a whole chain of documentation, and all I can do is encourage people to, hey, do the best you can to straighten it out. Don't get overly excited that it's going to take a long time, and just wait out the process, like what you're saying. Well, Don, let me ask you another question here. When people are trying to get their credit restored, and they want to build their credit rating, what are the credit ratings that start to, in other words, what's the levels of scores that you're looking for to give people credit?
Okay, good question, Steve. The ratings, the FICO ratings go from 300 to 850, and every bank that I've been with had a minimum of between 640 and 670, and that's to borrow on any basis, whether it be a mortgage, credit card, installment loan, whatever you might call it. So you need to maintain, at least in today's age, 670 is basically the minimum. 10, 15 years ago, it was 640. And that's not really easy to do. About 40%, maybe 45% of the people have at least a 670. But that's what you need. And there's no two ways about it. If you're under 670, the banks are basically going to say, I can't help you right now. Go to another bank. The other bank is going to tell you the same thing.
The FICO score, this is just a piece of trivia that's always bothered me. What does FICO stand for? I researched it. Fair Isaac Corporation. And
that's right.
That first developed the scoring system. So it's just a trivia, but that's what FICO stands for. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So let me give a little summary for a second here. If a person's got bad credit, one of the very best ways that they can get good credit is to get rid of all their outstanding bills that they haven't paid on. You can't just sit there and let them go forever, then catch up with them later. You have to take aggressive action to do something about it, show that you're concerned. And so the consolidation loan is the very best thing. So you take the cosigner that we talked about, somebody that believes in you, and you try to consolidate all your small stuff, particularly that's got the highest interest rates first, and you put them all into one big total, and you go to a bank and And if you can't get a loan yourself,